Hi guys, first of all, I just wanted to say that I was very pleased with the level of discussion and interaction so far in discussion board this week. I think you guys have been doing a great job in terms of thinking through your answers and completely following the instructions. So keep it up. You're on the right track in terms of what I expect for the rest of the semester. The purpose of this video is to follow up on what we've been talking about to add some more clarity, maybe to some points that needed clarification from the week. And from this video, I want you to respond to me in a second discussion board that is created. Instructions for this are in the syllabus, so go take a look at those and see exactly what I'm expecting, and it'll be more clear also by the end of the video what I want from this second discussion board for the week. So by way of following up, there were some points that were raised, quite a few points made about transaction and transportation costs. And I wanted to clarify a couple of things about both of them. First, when you talk about transportation costs, um, all of you were correct when you were talking about the cost associated with driving to the store and picking up whatever item you were talking about. But I wanted to add to that a second discussion about the cost of the roads. We talk about transportation costs being the cost of the gas, the cost of the car, but don't forget about the cost of roads. Um, Roads are primarily funded through tax revenue, okay, entirely funded through tax revenue, a variety of sources, and so that would be considered a transportation cost. Don't forget that whenever you're talking about the costs associated with transportation and transaction costs, and obviously urban areas may not entirely reduce transportation costs because there are more roads that we have built in urban areas. So don't forget about the role of taxes, particularly taxes, in transportation costs. Second, by way of clarification, cities do reduce transaction and transportation costs without a doubt. They only reduce them, though, to a point. Once cities become so large, then transportation and transaction costs become higher. For example, in Manhattan, which is a very dense city, very dense urban environment, there are so many people, 1 million people, on an 8 square mile island in Manhattan that it becomes crowded. So you might see more transaction costs in terms of maybe you can't get the product that you wanted because it's sold out, or transportation costs because it costs more to park, or it costs more to take the bus if you already own a car. So cities, by and large, definitely reduce transportation and transaction costs, but not always. Sometimes there are instances where cities become so large that you might see more transaction costs. Another point that I wanted to bring up was urban geography. You guys were right on about what urban geography involves, but Emily made a point, I believe, about Gary, Indiana, and I wanted to clarify that urban geography also includes a city's proximity or distance to other cities. For example, Gary, Indiana is closer to Chicago, and so you might see some interdependencies and interrelationships. So therefore, Chicago is an integral part of Gary, Indiana's urban geography. Bellevue, Nebraska, obviously the urban geography of Bellevue would have to include Omaha. So urban geography includes location and proximity to other places. Now, the point that I want to emphasize today and that I want you to respond to in today's discussion board is the discussion about which best captures what a city is. The city limits or the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. And many of you are making the point that when you start talking about the MSA, it gets to be a little fuzzy, there aren't clear boundaries, it's not quite fully understood. But let me ask you this. Who knows the exact physical boundaries of the city of Denver or the city of Miami? We know the exact physical boundaries of Omaha mostly because we live here. We're familiar with the city. But when we start talking about other cities that we're not familiar with, the discussion about city limits can be equally fuzzy. The second thing is if you only look at city boundaries, Omaha becomes larger than places like Minneapolis, St. Louis, Cleveland, Miami, all of those places are 3 to 4 times the size of Omaha in the metropolitan area. But by only looking at the city, you're leaving a large part of the area out. Omaha is not a larger place than Minneapolis, St. Paul. But whenever you only look at the city limits, that's the conclusion you have to arrive at. The other thing with regard to this is how you define where someone lives. In the U.S., we define population based on where your residence is, which is another way of saying where you spend the night. If someone works in Omaha, if someone does most of their daily activities in Omaha, but they go across the county line to Sarpy County to spend the night, then that's where they live. Well, in terms of population, that is not an adequate descriptor of where that person may spend most of their time, where they may have the largest economic impact. May not be where they reside. It may be where they spend most of their time. So therefore, there are two types of population. There's a daytime population and there's a nighttime population. The nighttime population is what you see in population statistics. It's what you see when we say that Omaha has 430,000 people in the city limits. That's the nighttime population. The other statistic is the daytime population, and that's the number of people who are in a city for whatever reason during the day. And Omaha's population during the day, for instance, is about 100 to 200,000 more than at night because people commute here primarily from Sarpy County to work. Finally, I want to challenge your thinking in terms of what is a state line, what is a county line, and what is a city limit. State lines do not exist. There is no such thing as a state line. It exists only in our imagination. It exists only on paper. I saw a lot of you have some really strong reactions to the idea that Omaha could be part of Iowa, or that part of Iowa could be part of Omaha because there's a state line. Well, a state line is arbitrary. It is artificial. It only has significance in terms of politics, in terms of our thinking. There is nothing inherently different about Iowa and Nebraska other than the name and other than where our governments are. So even though a state line may lie between Omaha and Council Bluffs, they can still be one area, very definitely. State lines, obviously you can't find one except on paper. Whenever you walk across the pedestrian bridge, the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge downtown, you might see a line in the pavement, but that's about as close as you're going to get to actually seeing a state line. So I'm not suggesting we all join in a chorus of We Are the World or anything, but whenever you start thinking about boundaries, understand they are entirely artificial. And just because a government says there is a boundary here doesn't mean that there is actually one. It may be more of a psychological boundary, it may be more of a political boundary, but Council Bluffs can absolutely be more, as much of or more of a part of the Omaha area than some places in Sarpy County, for example. So my point in the MSA discussion is be careful, because simply because there might be a state line or a county line in the way doesn't mean that that cannot be part of the Omaha or Minneapolis or wherever. Does not mean that that cannot be part of the area. So be aware of that. So in this week's in this follow-up discussion board, what I want you to do is revisit the topic of MSAs versus city limits, with what I said about city boundaries, with what I said about the population statistics, with what I said about the daytime and nighttime populations. Revisit that and tell me more about both, and tell me more about which one appeals more to you with this extra information. The discussion board should be completed by Monday, I believe at 5 p.m. Verify the syllabus to make sure I'm right about that. And then we'll start over again next week. Have a good weekend.